If you have ever built in a React application that talks to an API, you have probably written the same logic again and again, loading states, handling errors, caching, refetching every single time. And it works at first time. But once your application grows, things start to break down. Components get messy, requests get duplicated, and performance becomes a big problem. That's exactly where TanStack React Query comes in. It completely impacts and changes how you deal and manage your server data in React, handling fetching, caching, background updates, and mutations for you. In this video, we will build everything step by step together. We will start by setting up our React application using Vite, and then fetch data with the use of useQuery, handle updates and mutations, and understand how caching and the query invalidation actually work in the real applications. This is not a theory video or tutorial. We will build together examples and inspect what is going to happen in our network tab. By the end of this tutorial video, you will be able to handle API data in a clean, safe, scalable, and production ready. And I want to mention something over here. If you are not available now to stay and watch this a bit long video, please stick it to the watching list and back to it once you are ready to grab the most concepts of the React query with our test tag for the React applications. So without any further ado, let's start. Okay, first of all, I'm going to start with you from the very bottom at the front, everything from scratch, so you can grab everything we are going to learn in this full tutorial that will cover everything about the TanStack React query. So I want you to create a folder for our projects, and you can also open your terminal and you can check with this command, create that word directory, which folder or which where you are. And I want you to create a folder in the desktop. First of all, cd desktop if you want, like me over here, and create make dir a folder here. You can name it like TanStack React query tutorial. Pretty good. And I want you now to access this directory. Pretty good. Now we are in our folder over here. And then the first thing, we need to set up our React application. In this case, we are going to use a very powerful tool. I guess you already heard about, which is called Vite. So Vite over here, it powers many frameworks and tools. And Vite became the industry standard build tool for React applications. It's significantly fast and more modern than older tools like Create React App, which is now officially deprecated. I want you to head over to the documents and read everything you need from there. But in our case, we are going to install this command, npm create vite at latest. That will set up our React application immediately. Pretty good. So now, and wait a few moments and it will set up our Vite latest. Now you can name the project. Already we named our project like that. You can just put the dot over here and press enter, select the framework. In our case, it's React, and the variant here. Surely we were going for TypeScript, and installing also the npm and the start now. All you have to do now is just wait in a moment and it will set up our React application. Pretty good. It's installed now, and you can run your local host over here to see your page. Nice. But that's not our purpose. You can just stop the server from here, and you can just open your VS Code and enter the project there. And we can do that with just code dot. It will open our project in the VS Code IDE. Nice. You can now just get rid of the terminal, and you can open the internal terminal in the VS Code over here. You can just head over to terminal, new terminal over here, or with the shortcut of Control Shift and backticks. Nice. Our purpose now is to install the TanStack Query, and to do that, all we have to do is just go into TanStack Query, React Query. And what I like about this framework, it has very powerful documentation. And also it's a library for everything for your front end. You can head over to the installation over here to get started quickly. In our case, we are using the node package manager, so we can copy this command and paste it in our internal terminal of our VS Code over here. But let me zoom in so you can see exactly what we are doing over here. And over here, I want you to paste the command npm install a TanStack slash React query. With also something else we need to install it, which is very powerful also, which is the dev tool. You can find it also over here. This dev tool is like help us visualize all the inner working of React query, and it will likely save your hours of debugging if you find yourself in a panic, which is amazing. That will simplify your workflow. Copy the 10 stack and head over to our terminal, paste it, and enter. In a fraction of seconds, it will be installed our 10 stack React query. And then we can dive in and start learning. It's installed now. And the only thing we need to do it now to start using the React query is heading over to our root file. And wherever you are using React or Next.js, that means it's completely up to you. But the purpose is the same. You can go ahead in your React application, the main TX, where the application renders. And if you are using Next.js, that means you can go to the layout unit. So why we head over to our this page? Simply to utilize the TanStack query, React query, we need to wrap our app over here, which is just a boilerplate from the Vite. To utilize that, we need to wrap our application with something called query client provider. Let's put our app inside it. And the reason behind it, it's React query works using a central client that manage all of our data, like caching, fetching, and syncing. So first, we create the query client over here out of our create root function, query client, query client. Nice, and we can just get it from our 10-stack React query library. The second step, which we have to pass it to our query client provider, like client as a prop, and it has the value of query client from our library. Once we do that, every component inside of our main application component, it can use the React query features. Now, very briefly, why is TanStack Query? React Query is a library that will help us fetch, cache, and manage all of the server data, like updating, deleting, and even storing from the API. Instead of manually refetching, loading states, errors, or refetching data logic every time, React Query does all of that work for us. It's important because it makes the working with the APIs and the data on the server very easy and in a handy way. It keeps the UI fast and up to date without having to always recreate the same kind of states and behaviors for every single component. So in my opinion, this skill it must have, and you should learn 10 stack query if you are building a project that will have a bunch of users to use your application. Even if you are building to yourself, I think you need to use 10 stack query because not only to will save your time, but also it's going to completely change your application behavior. Now, the next thing we have to do is let's run our server. We can just run in a new terminal over here with the npm run dev. Nice. And open it on the port of 5173. Can just get rid of all of these tabs and let's structure our environment to start working now. Now let's start building our first React component that will utilize the TanStack query. So even though our application is using TypeScript, I'm not going to go too much on that side, at least for a beginner tutorial like this one. So first of all, let's get over to our main application over here component and let's delete everything. Pretty good. Also, we can get rid of all of this state and the unnecessary importance also over here. And creating our first component from the scratch. So the first thing we are going to do over here to make it very simple for you is heading over to our source directory and creating like a component for the over here. Component over here and making our first subject we are going to talking about, which is the querying. So here we can do the query example ESX file that will help you later for every subject we are going to cover to follow up in a clean way and structured way. So to start this off, I'm going to paste here the code we are going to learn with it, and you can find it in the source code in our in the description below with the GitHub repo. Now, all of our function query example here is doing is just like fetching some posts from this dummy API from JSON horde. It's like just an example to use the posts test your application with. And also it will go into loop over all of these posts and display it in our UI. And to see the result in our UI over here in the server, we can just call our application query example in the main app component over here with just simple saying the query example, and we can import it from our components query example file, save it, and here we go. Our post is being fetched and rendered in the UI through this simple map through the posts here with the ID, title, and the body of our text over here. However, important thing here, which is our function is looping through this few fetched data from the API, but we can just observe here if you refresh, it's nothing happened because we have just a five or a few posts. But imagine if you are in like a low internet connection country, and maybe you have 1,000 posts or something like that. That maybe will break your application. Although we don't manage our errors and the loading states, etc. in the application, we can improve it much better. This function. So to escape the bottleneck of our UI will be poor or something like that, or the user experience will be disrupted, we need to do something like handling the errors and the loading states and etc. and make our code clean and scalable. Okay? To do that, we have to initialize like a three states over here. One for the post to be registered after the fetching from the API, and the second one checking the status of it's loading the data or it's not. We are going to check also for the errors, and if there are any error that will be shows in our UI. So here with the try catch method over here, we fetch the data, and if there is a response and the data is successfully grabbed, then we have to store it in our post state over here. And if there is an error, that will shows us in the UI over here with this something went wrong note. Or if it's loading, that will shows loading. And we can test it out with refreshing the data over here. And it's loading is in a fraction of a second. It's hard to see it. Then finally, it will be looking through this map method through the posts and display in the UI. But check this scenario. If you are like have a big project or a large application that will be using from multiple millions and millions of users, imagine just like that. That would be hard to every time refresh and check for every component, creating a state over here to check every action of our data fetching from the API or from the server. So here, the solution is TanStack Query. TanStack Query will make our lives easier. So first of all, we need to get rid of all of this try catch method over here, and we can do it through just like copying it from over here, this async function, and paste it out of the query example function. And let's get rid of our this try catch method with the useEffect over here, like that. And also let's get rid of all of our states from here. So, and let's get rid of all of this try catch. We don't need them. All of them. Pretty good. And let's get out the calling of the function over here. Now let's fix our fetch post over here function. Nice. For now, we have the fetch post over here function isolated from the UI display here for in our query example function. So now to use TanStack, we have something brilliant and magical from the TanStack query library, we have access to one of the most important hook that called useQuery hook. And this hook simply what's going to do is fetching the data from the server or from the database or specifically from the API and show it on the UI for the users. That's all the job has to do, our hook. And also, not only that, it will also handle all of the loading states and the error management that coming from the API. Now our use query, we have to pass two things. The first one, which is the query key. And query key is very important when it comes to caching, but we are not there yet. So you have to just put a nickname or something like that related to what you are coding. In our case, we are fetching posts, so that will be our nickname that related to our subject. Second thing we pass with it's the query function. And query function, it has to be the fetched data. In our case here, it's already determined with this fetch posts. So we have to pass it over here. Hold on, one thing, we have to return something from our fetch post over here function, API fetching. So what we're going to do is just get rid of this one and just return our response.json. We can also delete the condition over here. Now, what does that mean? We have access to everything this use query hook returns from the fetched there. And that means we have access to the data, it's being fetched for us. We have access to the is pending state. We have access to the errors that may happen on the process of fetching the data and etc. And based on these returns, we can control our UI to work properly. Now, in our case, we are doing the is loading and handling the error also in our UI. So we can just replace this is pending with is loading. And if you can notice here, we have the post as a data. So here we can just imitate our data here to be called posts. Pretty good. Now let's save and see our UI page here in the server. Let's refresh. And here we go. And one thing we have to make sure the post does exist. And you can fetch the data. Nice. 3 minutes ago, we have the same logic but with a different code base because all of the states that we have to initialize and use them. For each component, imagine if you have like a tons of components and you have to manage for each of them 3 states and you have to handle them in the UI also. That's too much. So that's what a query does mean. And there's a much more you can do with this user query. Now imagine if you want to refetch the data from the default like this one to another method called the lazy query. A lazy query doesn't happen but automatically you have to trigger it. Now to do with React query, you can do the following. So over here, I can initialize a button over here, and this button says, for example, load more. And I want to pass the on click here event on click, and I want it to, whenever we click this button, it will reactivate our use query hook and loading more posts. I can come here and initialize a state, for example, for the is loading data and set is loading data. We can use the use state over here hook, and by default, I can initialize it as a false. Whenever we click it on this button, it will reactivate our hook over here. So here I can pass the setter function is loading data here to be true. So I want over here to our hook here to be enabled only when the is loading data is true. So now if we save and refresh our server over here, so you can see there is no data until I click or press the loading more. That's one of the things you can do. and that will give you a more control over your hook. And the data it's been fetched from the server there or the API. What else you can do? Actually, there is a many, and that depends on what you are getting the use query hook. And there is a lot, and you can specify here a lot of things. Is fetching, is loading, is pending, and many more specifications. And that depends on your case. And if we are going to details what use query hook gives us from the returned API, we can have the refetch. And it's worth to explain this one. What does that mean? Refetch over here, if we specify a button like that of refetch, that will allows us to manually refresh the data if it's in stale. What does that mean? Refetching the data manually through just clicking at this button and forcing it to be refetch our page. Let's look at this example over here. And to see it in explicit way, we have to just open our network in the developers tool. And here we can just load more and it's been fetched. Just click load more again. Doesn't do anything because it just enabled the is loading data once. But now if we click on the refresh, and you can see here, it's been refetching every time our data. And our response here is coming with the 5 posts that is being fetched from the API. So that's a really good case. That's everything what I'm going to explain about the query hook and the query method in our TanStack React query. Next thing, I'm going to dive to another hook. It's very important, which is mutation. It's kind of similar to query, but with different functions. Query basically is your fetching the data, but mutation is when you're creating, updating, or deleting the data. What I'm going to do now, I'm going over here to create a new file called, or just I can copy this file and duplicate it over here, paste it, and I can just rename our file here to be mutation. Example, I've created the mutation over here and specified with our component over here mutation example, and I will render it also in our app over here. So simply I will just comment out our previous example and doing the new one. So here it's been rendered in our UI. Now this is the mutation example I'm going to talk about in this chapter. Now let me go over what it is, this components. Particularly is a simple component that has a form. As you can see here, the input, texture, and the button for creating our posts with a basic example of what mutation is. Simply, as I explained it, is the way how to refer your server data through the API, like creating, updating, or deleting records. And through this simple form, you can just add the title, and you can add also a body text of your post to this post API. Now I'm going to try it for you. Like type in something over here for the title and the body and click the create post. Nothing much happens, but behind the scenes, once we click it over here, it a network happens behind the scenes, like a put, dispatch, or get to our API. And to do actually create a post and render it in our over here, this commented out our post to be shown in the UI, like over here, we need to do is pretty simple using the React query and through our magical hook called useMutation. So first of all, our function over here simply just fetching the data through this method of post and trying to get back our new post data from the form. I'm going to fill it out. And we are using states to keep track our form. Now how we can go implement our user mutation hook? Simply, I'm gonna come over here and create our use hook mutation. Use mutation. The use mutation hook basically it's a bit different from the use query. It doesn't require to get a query key, but it does require a mutation function. Mutation function. And this mutation function should be inside the query braces. And our mutation function, it will be the create post function, which is the responsible of creating our post from over here and post it to the API. What we got back from this is we got the mutate. This is where you can create your posts. Now I wanted to call this mutate function once the user click the button create post, and simply here we can do it with the event on click and using the callback arrow function mutate. Now this mutate function requires us to pass some props into it. And that's because if you look over to our create post function over here, it requires the new post, which is will be the title and the body. And also if we get our API, the fake API over here, we need to pass the title and also the body over here to create a new one. For us to do that, we need to pass an object over here. And wherever you pass to this mutation function, it's going to be our new post over here through this mutation function. So I'm going to pass over here in our object, the title, the body, and I'm going to force also the user ID to be 1. Let me save over here and let's create a post over here. For example, hello, and the body, let's say, cuckoo, cuckoo. And once we check our network tab over here, simply let's create a post and the post request has been created. And also if we can check here, the request method is a post. That means our post is being created. Perfect. Now there is more to get with this, and we can get more from what we learned with the querying, use query hook, like the mutation. We can get also the is loading, is pending, can get all of the similar information like the use query hook. The data here will be our no post. We can get also the is pending. We can get also the is error boolean, and also we have the ability to get the error message if we use it in the UI. And with that, we characterize it in our UI to show what at the end of this request. Now, if we test it, it will be shown over here in the UI. Let's say, for example, hi, hi, hi. And for the body, let's say, for example, whatever. Nice. It's been creating the post, and our title is hi, 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 and the body will be whatever showed in the display in the UI after creating our post through this post method. So that's all of our use mutation hook. But what matters in the TanStack query, TanStack is like the query is much more important than use mutation because the query it has to show the results in the UI for the user experience, and the mutation kind of it happens in the backend. So querying is much more, or I can say it's 90% important than the mutation. Now, after finishing explaining the query and the mutation, now we need to dive to the one of the most important topics, which is the caching. So TanStack has the priority for the caching because it's so important for the front-end development. So what I'm going to do over here, just come to our component, creating a new file, and we can say it caching example. So without any further to do, to not wasting a lot of time over here coding line by line our example to study it, I'm going to copy and paste the code over here. You can find it in the description in our GitHub repo. So caching, as a beginner, you don't have the attention to this topic, but once you have a real project with the real users, caching became the most important thing you have to think about. Now, in order to understand the caching, so what we have over here, two components over here, the post list and the caching example. So the post list is going to cache our data and to be shown also in the UI through this caching method. And to do implement it in our UI, we need to call it in the up over here. So let's just get rid of this and call our component caching. If we say, we can see it in our UI over here, it's been displayed. What I have over here is a button in our caching example component, which mounts and unmounts our component. If we click over here, you can see unmount and mount. So this handles the fetching, and this over here just showing and hiding the list of posts, our posts, like this one. Let's check also our network here, and I want you to notice once we do the mount and unmount. Basically, it's just fetch it from the first time and nothing happens again. No request for the API. There is a request costs money and time for the user. Directly communicates with this API over here and gets this data back. Now, once we click on the button and mount again, what's the point of creating a new request? I don't see nothing because the data has changed. Maybe there is a situation when it removes the component and show it in a 3 or 4 seconds again, and you want to force it to fetch the most up-to-date data. But 99% of the cases, that's not what you want. Actually, you would save the internet bandwidth and also the time of the user by just caching that data for the specific amount of time or until possibly know that the data is not up to date anymore. How we can do that? Well, actually, we can do that with the TanStack query, and it makes it very simple with this user query over here. First of all, there is a concept called the data to be still, and we can use the still time over here, like 1,000 milliseconds times 60. That means like at 6 seconds to be still this data. And to understand it, you have to focus on two things. There is a still data and there is a fresh data. Fresh data is a data that just get fetched and it's the most up-to-date data. There is no changes, updates, or something like that. Still data is a data that not up to date and that maybe you want to fetch again, so then it becomes up to date. And because of that, there is a property you can pass over here called the still time. So this data is calculated how long our data to still until it becomes outdated. Now, if you put it over here, just a 0 and save, and you can just check over here. Once we unmount and mount again, it will be fetched because it fetched by default. There is no preserved data in the cache. But let's make it, for example, a 5. And in milliseconds, that will be 1,000 times 5. Let's uncomment this and save and check also over here. Let's fetch for the first time. Okay, the post is fetched, and while I'm doing the fetching, but nothing happens until the 5 seconds passed. Pretty good. And now the data is being preserved up to date until it's been refreshed again, and the 5 seconds passed away. So that's our save time, how it works. And in the 5 second, that data, the data is not fetching that because it's been preserved and our data is cached in the TanStack query system. And that's why it's not fetching until the 5 second passed away. Now there is a concept, another concept here over here, or another property called the GC time. And that means basically how long the unused data should be stayed in the memory. Now it maybe looks similar to our still time, but there is a big difference most people confuse about. Still time controls how long that the fresh data is considered fresh before the TanStack query refetching it. On the other hand, the GC time controls how long unused cache data is going to stay in the memory before it's deleted. So the difference here, after you know it, you can consider this G time is more internal because it's in your memory, and the still time, it will be shown for the user in the UI. And there's another thing you can consider, which is I want to refresh data after changing our tab over here. If I change over here to be 50, that means 5 seconds, nothing happens. And in my case over here, I want to just refresh it again. Nothing happens, but I want to, once I change the tab over here and back, it be refreshed. You can see nothing happens. Now, if I uncomment this refresh window focus over here and they give it the value of true, and check also over here. Once we change the tab and back, no fetching request over here because the state time matter a lot. But if we put over here the default 0 over here, save and check again. Once we change the tab, you can notice over here a new fetch request happens whenever we change in our tab. So that's the idea behind the refetch on window Fox property. And there is another properties you can discover and go with them. For example, this refetch on reconnect, that means once our internet is died and live again, that our fetching it will be success and it will refresh after losing the internet and it's back. That automatically it will be refreshed. So now in a scenario, for example, if you have a notification application or a real-time database or a store to be updated immediately, so in this case, what we're gonna do is simply just get rid of all of these properties over here, and let me uncomment this new property called refetch interval. That means after each 3 seconds, automatically it will be updating the data and refetching the request over here and making the cache again to be refetched. Save and let me refresh our page over here. No matter thing is happening, it's going to be refreshed after 3 seconds automatically. Look over here. 1, 2, 3. Pretty good. 1, 2, 3. It's been refreshed automatically. No need to manually mount and mount the posts to be refreshed. Now let's have this scenario. If we, for example, we are sure the data is stale, but we want to force it to refetch once we click on the invalidate query button over here. You see, even it's in cached, once we create the invalid query over here, it will be forced the fetching even if the cache data still time. For example, here amount, nothing happens, but we can click in the invalid query over here and it will immediately fetch the data and make the request. And for this scenario, for example, you have a list of posts, okay, and the cache time is like 6 seconds, but in that meantime, you want to add a new post. So it's been added a new post, and we want to refetch the data and force it to be refetched directly and force that data to become a state. The way we do that by invalidating a specific query by a query key example. Now, that's one of the most important example that we can do. Now, to do that, I already made it over here, and we are, if you notice we are doing it out of the post list component. In another component over here, what we just did over here is we added over here a button of invalidate query, and we passed a function of invalidate query. And our purpose over here for this function invalidate query is to force this take time to be a 0 and refetch it immediately once the button it's been clicked through this function. And the way we do that is we have to initialize the query clients. It's similar to the what we did in the beginning in our main over here with the use query client from the TanStack. So you can notice over here that we can specify which query we need to do through this query key over here that specifies what posts and lists need to be refetched and invalidate the data whenever we find the post query key here. Now, if we go in here to test it, and let's say how much we click in the mount and mount here, nothing happens because we know that data it's been stirred and it's been cached. But every time we click the our button invalid query over here, it's been forced to refetch, and the cache not important over here because we forced it to refetch our data from the API. Mount again, nothing happens, and the invalidate query button over here, it's been refetched the data through just calling this function, and immediately it has the key of the post, and even if it's outside our function use query over here. Now you can find how different this from our previous example on the query when we fetch the data over here, and inherently they are the same, and the main difference over here, this is not powerful because if I want to force a refetch by using this refetch function over here, I have to be inside the function or the component that which has to call the use query hook over here, and I get it back from there. or I have to be a children from the same component. It's calling the refetch or returning the refetch from the use query hook. And that becomes a completely different thing. But with invalidating query, you can see I invalidated the query from a different component of this post list. It doesn't have to be from the parent component and the child component. It can be a completely different components like siblings and etc. And that's the main difference and how it's powerful these invalid queries over here. Okay, everyone. At this point, I hope and you should understand and learn 90% of what I think you are gonna using with the TanStack query. Understanding the use query, mutation, caching, and now at this point, you need to start using it in your project comfortably and start creating the consistency and the muscle memory to actually use it. And also, we don't forget to mention this. There is another advanced edge cases in the TanStack query. You can learn about it, or if you want a video or tutorial like this one to explain it, just comment below and I will do it for you. But mostly 90% of your project, you are gonna using these cases in your fetching API safely with the TanStack query, or in the old way they called React query. So if you found this helpful, like and comment down, and I will see you in the next video.